G'day, I'm Ryuki-san Dev, and in part 27 of the series Unity for the Absolute Beginner, we will work on phase 3 of our second game. Alrighty, so we are continuing on from phase 2, where we set up the player with movement and shooting. We scripted in the Seeker ability and also set the trigger for the enemy to die when hit enough times by player bullets. So today we'll work on the Game Manager to hold scores and manage the spawner. It will also keep track of player lives and spawning the player into the game. We will also set up the player's trigger so the player can be hit and killed. And we will also configure the spawner to use the player score to control the waves rather than enemy kills, which was just a temporary solution. And we'll also do a little prepping for the boss in phase 4. So let's get going. Okay, so I'm opening the project now from where we left off in phase 2. Alrighty, so let's first get the Game Manager object and the script in. So right click in your hierarchy and create an empty and name it Game Manager. And create a script in your scripts folder and give it the same name. And drag it onto the Game Manager object in the hierarchy. Okay, let's open the script and make a start. Well, for starters, this script is going to keep track of the player's lives. So let's do serialize field, private, int, player lives equals 3. Just go with 3 for now. And it's also going to keep score, and we need that public so that our spawner will be able to reference that later. So public int player score. And just for statistics, we'll keep track of enemies killed as well. So serialize field private int enemies killed. Alright, now we're going to need to communicate with the spawner, so we need a reference to that with private spawner script. And finally, we also need a reference to the player object so that we can spawn the player into the scene. So public game object player. Now, in the meantime, let's just rem out the player lives line, otherwise Unity will just keep annoying us with warnings that the variables are not being used. Okay, so that'll do for the declarations for now. So let's go to the start method, and first of all we need to retrieve the spawner script into the spawner script container. So spawner script equals game object dot find, and then spawner in speech marks dot get component spawner. Alright, we're ready to go with some functions now. So we can delete the update method. I don't think we're going to be needing that. So first off, let's keep score. So let's make a new function that our enemy will be able to call when it's destroyed to update the player's score. So public void got point int point amount. And in between the curlies, let's do player score plus equals point amount. And we're also keeping track of the enemies killed, so let's do enemies killed plus plus. So remember in phase 2 we gave the enemy a variable for how many points it will award when killed. Well, this is what that function is going to receive when it's called. The temporary amount will be stored in point amount. Then in the function it will add that amount to the player score. And it's also going to add 1 to our enemies killed statistics. Okay, so this function is all ready to go. Now we need to get into our enemy script and call it when it's destroyed. So let's save this. And now let's open the enemy script. So this script is going to need to communicate with the Game Manager as well. So we need a reference to it with private Game Manager script. And then in start we need to retrieve the script with Game Manager script equals game object dot find and Game Manager and speech marks dot get component Game Manager. Okay, we have a link to Game Manager, so now we can call that public function got_point that we made. So we just simply scroll down to the onTrigger code before the objects are destroyed and type in GameManager script dot got_point and then award points. So we are calling the function that we just made earlier in the GameManager script to add points to the score, and the points will be whatever we specified in the award points variable. So let's save this and click on enemy normal, and you can see the award points variable that we set in phase 2. So we need to now specify how many points to award for each enemy. So for enemy normal, I'm going to do 5 points. Enemy shooter, I'm going to do 8 points. Enemy seeker, I'll do 8 points. And enemy free mind, 10 points. Now, after the game is done and it's all tested, of course, you can change the scoring system. You probably want to make these points a lot higher. Now, before we run the game, click on the spawner object and let's drag all the enemies into the first wave so that we get a good mix. And also change the next wave's score a little higher so that we get a good long test. I'm just going to do 50 for the first wave and then 60 for the second and 70 for the third. We'll probably only get to test the first wave probably anyway. Alright, we're ready to test this out, so click on the Game Manager object so that we can keep track of the score and the enemies killed. And run. Alright, shoot some enemies and watch the points and enemies killed increase. Cool. Alright, well that wasn't so bad. Now on to the next one. So let's work on when the game starts, the player is instantiated in, and if the player is destroyed and still has lives, then instantiate another one in. And then if all lives are gone, the game is over. So firstly, let's make a coroutine to run when the game starts and when the player gets hit and still has lives left. So let's get back into the Game Manager script. Okie doke. So let's do our enumerator first. So we'll do the code first and then I'll explain it afterwards. So let's do enumerator get ready. And in between the curlies, do spawner script dot stop all coroutines. And then yield return wait for seconds 0.5f. Then debug.log get ready in speech marks. And yield return new wait for seconds 2. And instantiate player. And finally spawner script dot start spawn. Alright, so this routine is going to be used when the game starts or when the player gets hit. The first line is to stop all coroutines in spawner script. It's there because if the player dies, you wouldn't want the spawner to carry on spawning enemies, because when the player spawns back in again, it might get hit by an enemy before you get a chance to move. The next line waits for half a second. It doesn't really have to be there, we're just doing that for testing. Then the third line is a placeholder for the GUI to say get ready. We don't have the GUI in yet, so we're just using a debug to put the output to the console to say get ready. Then wait for 2 seconds, which would be basically holding that message on the GUI for 2 seconds. And then instantiate the player. We don't have to specify where to instantiate the player because when we made the prefab, we already positioned it in the right place. Then the next line starts the spawner off in the spawner script. If you remember in phase 2, we created a public function for that. Right, so now we just need to first run this when the game starts. So in our start method, type in start coroutine, get ready. Alright, we're done here for the minute. So you'll remember that the spawner script is already starting the spawning by itself. So we need to go into that script and stop it because now the game manager is going to kick it off. So let's save this and open our spawner script. And now we can just remove the start coroutine line from the start method. And let's save this. Alright, and now we can delete the player from the hierarchy because it's going to be spawned in by the game manager. And click on Game Manager and drag the player prefab from your prefabs folder into the player field that we created. So now in theory, when we run this, we should see Get Ready pop up in our console, and then it should wait 2 seconds and then spawn the player in and then start spawning enemies. So let's play and see if it works. Cool, it's doing it. Alright, well, the next logical step is to set up the player getting hit and respawning another one if you have more lives remaining. So firstly, let's get back into the GameManager script. Okay, so let's unrem our player lives line because we'll use it now. So in here we need a new function to control what happens when a player is hit. This function will be called by the player when it's hit or destroyed. So let's do a new function, public void player got hit. And now in the curlies, firstly, since the player was actually hit, we need to decrease the player lives. So player lives and then 2 minus signs. It's just to -1. And now we want to check if the player has any more lives left. So if player lives is less than 1, and then if the player lives are less than 1, i.e. 0, then it's pretty much game over. So in those curlies, we want to stop any enemies spawning with spawner script dot stop all coroutines. Then we'll put another placeholder in here for a GUI item, which will come later, but for now we'll just use a console output. So debug.log game over. And then we'll exit the function with a return. Then outside the if curlies, is basically if the player still does have lives left, we will run the routine get ready with start coroutine get ready. This will of course do what it did in the start of the game. Cool, now we need to get into the player script and script in the trigger. So let's save this. And let's jump into the player script. Alright, so the player script is also going to need a link to the GameManager script. So private GameManager script. And we're going to need our start method back in this one. So void start. And in between the curlies, let's retrieve the GameManager script with GameManager script equals GameObject dot find GameManager dot get component GameManager. Alright, now let's get our trigger sorted. So at the bottom of the class, private void on trigger enter collider other. And in between the curlies, let's call the function we made in GameManager with GameManager script dot player got hit. And then destroy the player and what it collided with. Okay, so when the player hits something, which will be either an enemy bullet or the enemy itself, it will call the player hit function in GameManager and destroy both the player and the bullet or enemy. Then the player got hit function in turn will subtract 1 from player lives and then check if more lives remain. If it does, let's spawn the player back in. If it doesn't, game is over. So let's save this and click on the Game Manager so we can monitor player lives and run. Alright, let's get hit by something. Cool, player lives went down to 2. Player respawned in. Get hit again, down to 1 life. And hit again, game is over. And spawning has stopped. Cool. Alright, so when we get hit, the spawner stops, that's great. But what about the enemies and bullets that are already in the scene? We need to wipe those out too. So let's do that. So let's get back into the GameManager script. Alrighty, so let's make a new function whose sole purpose will be to wipe everything off the screen when the player is hit. So let's do public void wipe enemies. Now, if you remember in video 21 all about loops, well, we can use the for each loop to cycle through the enemies and bullets in the scene and destroy them. So let's do GameObject, and it's an array, so we put two empty square brackets. Enemies equals GameObject dot find GameObjects with tag enemy, and then for each GameObject target in enemies, and then in the curlies, destroy target. And now we'll do the bullets with GameObject and two empty square brackets again. Enemy bullets equals GameObject dot find GameObjects with tag enemy bullet, and then for each GameObject target in enemy bullets, and then between those curlies, destroy target again. So we've created a local array of game objects called enemies, and that array will contain all the game objects with the tag enemy. Then we use the for each loop to systematically go through each one of them and destroy them. And the bullets is just the same, only the tag is enemy bullet. So this function could be used from anywhere where you want to wipe everything from the scene. We want to do it when the player gets hit but still has lives left, so let's put it in just before the start coroutine get ready. So wipe enemies, and that's it. So let's save this and run. And I'm just going to wait for a shooter to come out and fire some bullets before I get hit, so I can make sure the bullets get wiped. And there we go. Wiped enemies and the enemy bullets when we died, and the spawner of course stopped. So now when we spawn back in, there is no possible chance we can get killed before we can move. Cool. Alright, now have you noticed throughout the last two test plays that the Seeker is just travelling straight down the screen? Remember in phase 2 we told the Seeker to follow the player, but now because the player is being spawned in, it is now named player with the clone in brackets. So let's correct that. So open your enemy script. And in the start method, just edit the player equals GameObject.find line and add the clone in brackets to the player name in speech marks. Now the Seeker will be able to find you again. And you can save and give this a quick test if you want to. Just on the subject of cloned objects instantiated into the scene, they will always have the word clone like that in brackets. You can actually rename your objects so that they don't have the clone word, but for one, it's extra code and it comes with performance costs. And secondly, well, for me personally, I like the word clone in there, and it's a clone anyway, so yeah. Anyway, back to it. So things are starting to come together now. We have lives, score, and kills being tracked. Right now, all of these things are only visible if you have GameManager script selected while you play, but once we get the GUI stuff in, it will all be on the screen in the game. Alright, so you remember back in phase 1, we created the spawner with a wave system, but for testing purposes, we just used enemy kills to control when the next wave would start. Well, you could leave it like that if you wanted to, I guess, but I think waves based on the player's score would be better. So let's sort that out. So let's open our spawner script. Alright, so you remember up here we created a temporary variable just to test our spawner out with the enemy count. So we can delete that line now because we're going to use the player's score. Now as soon as that's deleted, you're going to see a couple of errors in your script because it's referencing something that doesn't exist anymore. Don't worry about that just yet, we'll fix that in a second. So we will need a communication link to GameManager. So let's do private GameManager script. And in start, let's retrieve the GameManager script with GameManager script equals GameObject.find GameManager.getComponent GameManager. I think we've done this 4 or 5 times now in the video. So let's go now and change our spawn waves code. replace enemy count with GameManager script dot player score. And we don't need enemy count anymore, so you can delete that line. And that's it. The spawn waves routine will keep looping until the score in next wave score is reached to start the next wave. So let's save this. Okay, and now click on the spawner and you can see the score values to move to the next wave. I'm going to set mine a little lower just for testing. I'm going to set the first wave to 25, second to 45, and the third one to 65. So now when the game starts, you will have to score 25 points to get to the next wave, and then 45 to get to the wave after that, etc, etc. Of course, later on you can change these to much bigger numbers. Now I'm going to set up my wave enemies again. I'm going to have normals for the first wave. Second looks okay, and I'll throw the Seeker in the last wave. Alright, click on Game Manager so you can keep track of the score and play. Alrighty, scoring points. Got 25 points. Here comes the second wave. Got 45 points. That's the next wave. And 65 points, and that is it, because there's only 3 waves in there. Cool. Alright, so what's next? Well, after a certain amount of waves, I guess we're going to need a boss battle. It's the normal way these kind of games seem to work, right? So we need to make a boss. We will do the boss in the next video, but in the meantime, let's set up the system for spawning it in. So let's get back into the Game Manager script. So this script is going to need to know if the game is running normally with waves or if it's a boss battle. Because if it's a boss battle, when the player gets hit, different things need to happen. So up in declarations, let's do a bool this time. So public bool is boss battle equals false. We're making it public because the spawner needs to be able to see this. Alright, let's save this and jump into our spawner script. So the spawner is going to need a reference to the actual boss prefab. So let's do public GameObject boss. And let's make a function to spawn the boss in. So let's do private void boss spawn. And then in the curlies, I guess before the boss comes in, we need to wipe the enemies. So let's do GameManager script dot wipe enemies. And then we'll spawn the boss in with instantiate boss. And well, since there's no boss yet, let's rem out the instantiate line. And below it, let's just do debug.log spawning boss. Alright, and now up in our spawn waves routine, replace the debug line in the else statement with GameManager script dot isBossBattle equals true, and then boss spawn. Righty, so now when there are no more waves left, we are setting the bool we made in GameManager to true for a boss battle, and then we are running the function we made to spawn the boss in. But for now, it won't spawn anything in because there is no boss. It will just give an output message saying spawning boss. Alright, let's save this. Alright, now I'm going to click on the spawner again and change the next wave scores one more time just to make it quicker to get to the boss. So I'm going to do 10, 20, and 30. Okay, and now play. So shooting and making points, and let's get to the last wave. And boom, spawning boss. All waves are finished, and then the next step would be to spawn the boss, and that's what it's going to do. Alright, let's do one more thing for this video. Let's jump back into the Game Manager script. So in our routine get ready, we want to have two sets of instructions, one for the normal waves and one for boss battles. So above all the code in the routine, let's do if is boss battle and a couple of curlies. Then outside those curlies, let's do else and a couple of curlies again. Now drag all the code below into the else condition. So if it's a boss battle, we have some instructions later which we're going to put in between these brackets. And if it isn't, then just do the normal stuff that it's been doing. So this is kind of pre-prepared for the boss. Alrighty, let's save this. And click on the spawner object, and you can see that after we've created our boss prefab, we will drag it into this field that we just created here, and then it'll be ready to go. So a quick recap. We got our game manager script started, and it's now handling player lives, keeping score, and tracking enemy kills. It's also handling the respawning of the player back in when it's destroyed, as long as the player has lives left. And it handles the wait and messaging between waves. And it's generally handling the game flow along with the spawner. And we've also got it a little bit prepared, ready for the boss when it's created. We edited the spawner script to now communicate with the game manager and now use the player's score to determine when the next wave starts. And we've also got that a little bit ready for the boss. And we edited the player script and added a trigger to also communicate with the game manager when it gets hit. And there was a few other little bits and pieces in between. So in the next video, phase 4, we will create the boss and we will script some kind of entrance for it and obviously some abilities, how it will attack, etc. And we'll add some instructions into GameManager to control it as well. And then depending on how long that video is, we'll see how we go. And then of course later on down the track, we will start bringing the game to life with the GUI and sounds and particle effects. And we still need a menu with the high scores and possibly some kind of preferences for the player to choose from. So still quite a lot to do. So I hope to see you for the next installment of this game.